This amateur footage reportedly shows Russian military helicopters flying into Crimea. The fear amongst politicians here in Kiev is that Russia has now embarked on the annexation of Crimea. Whether that happens quickly over the coming days or gradually over the coming weeks and months in a war of attrition, they can see part of their country possibly slipping away from their control. In Crimea, tension built throughout the day after troops in unmarked uniforms entered 2 airports. By late evening, it prompted this strong response from the acting Ukraine president.
The Russian Federation has begun open aggression against our country. On the pretense of training, they've brought their military to the Crimea. They've not only seized the parliament of the Crimea, they're trying to take over the control of the civilian services and communications. And they're trying to block Ukraine's military bases.
President Putin, in telephone conversations with Western leaders, insists he wants to avoid an escalation in Crimea. But at the UN, his ambassador said the crisis was not their fault.
Well, of course, as you know, we have an agreement with Ukraine on the presence of the Russian Black Sea Fleet with a base in Sebastopol, and we're acting within the framework of that agreement.
Ukraine's new leadership says it will not be provoked into a military response. Everyone is desperate to achieve a diplomatic solution, but events on the ground could make that increasingly difficult. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Kiev.
Hey YouTube, how's it going? Major developments now over in Ukraine, Crimea region. There's news coming through that 13 planes have landed from Russia in Crimea, each plane containing over 150 troops. So basically what we're having now is Russia going in. They're going in hard to take Crimea, I believe. When I say hard, they're going in with numbers. Today we've had just tonight we've had the Ukrainian ambassador going to the UN and saying that he's accusing Russia of challenging their national integrity. Also, he has come out and he has said that he believes Ukraine is strong enough to defend herself against Russia. Now, Obama, in response to this, he is going live very soon on most media networks. Over here in the UK, he's going live on Sky. I have no doubt it'll be on the BBC. I got an alert on Fox. Very worrying times. I just wish that the US would heed the words of one of their previous presidents and stop getting involved in foreign entanglements, and the UK as well, and basically the whole of NATO. Worrying times, folks. Yeah, tune in to see what Obama's got to say on this. Whatever his rhetoric is will be key to see where we move on from here. We've had Putin today telling the EU people to stay out, stop meddling, and we've also had NATO leaders or NATO defence ministers meeting in Brussels. They will be meeting for the next 2 days, folks. So yeah, things are moving on at a pretty breakneck speed.
Over the last several days, the United States has been responding to events as they unfold in Ukraine. Now, throughout this crisis, we have been very clear about one fundamental principle. The Ukrainian people deserve the opportunity to determine their own future. Together with our European allies, we have urged an end to the violence and encouraged Ukrainians to pursue a course in which they stabilize their country, forge a broad-based government, and move to elections this spring. I also spoke several days ago with President Putin, and my administration has been in daily communication with Russian officials, and we've made clear that they can be part of an international community's effort to support the stability and success of a united Ukraine going forward, which is not only in the interest of the people of Ukraine and the international community, but also in Russia's interests. However, we are now deeply concerned by reports of military movements taken by the Russian Federation inside of Ukraine. Russia has a historic relationship with Ukraine, including cultural and economic ties, and a military facility in Crimea. But any violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity would be deeply destabilizing, which is not in the interest of Ukraine, Russia, or Europe. It would represent a profound interference in matters that must be determined by the Ukrainian people. It would be a clear violation of Russia's commitment to respect the independence and sovereignty and borders of Ukraine and of international laws. And just days after the world came to Russia for the Olympic Games, it would invite the condemnation of nations around the world. And indeed, the United States will stand with the international community in affirming that there will be costs for any military intervention in Ukraine. The events of the past several months remind us of how difficult democracy can be in a country with deep divisions. But the Ukrainian people have also reminded us that human beings have a universal right to determine their own future. Right now, the situation remains very fluid. Vice President Biden just spoke with the Prime Minister of Ukraine to assure him that in this difficult moment, the United States supports his government's efforts and stands for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and democratic future of Ukraine. I also commend the Ukrainian government's restraint and its commitment to uphold its international obligations. We will continue to coordinate closely with our European allies. We will continue to communicate directly with the Russian government, and we will continue to keep all of you in the press corps and the American people informed as events develop. Thanks very much.
The chorus of international voices urging caution in Ukraine and above all urging Russia to refrain from military action have been reinforced by NATO's Secretary General.
Russia must stop its military activities and its threats. We support Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. We support the rights of the people of Ukraine to determine their own future without outside interference. And we emphasize the need for Ukraine to continue to uphold the democratic rights of all people and ensure that minority rights are protected.
An overnight phone call between Presidents Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin has reportedly only served to underline fundamental differences of position. This was reflected as well in an emergency session of the UN Security Council, where Russia maintained it was acting to protect its citizens despite the lack of evidence of any tangible threat. And remember, Russia may be talking to its international partners, but not with Kiev.
Hey YouTube, how's it going? Quite major developments in my opinion. You've now got the Ukrainian Prime Minister, Yatsenyuk. He has now come out and he has said the Ukraine is on the brink of disaster, and I quote, he's appealed to the international community, quote, "This is a red alert, it is no threat, this is actually a declaration of war." He is accusing Russia of declaring war on the Ukraine by their continuation of these aggressive manoeuvres, in his opinion, aggressive manoeuvres. And of course, Vladimir Putin is standing by the line that he has to protect Russian interests. We've got the Ukrainian military, they are now on combat readiness. The USA and the UK, they have now pulled out of the preliminary round of meetings for the G8 summit, due to be held in Sochi in June this year. So that's just the latest diplomatic goings-on behind the scenes. Watch for more things happening as the day goes on, folks.
Good evening. We start tonight with the news that Russia has formally approved a decision to send troops into Ukraine. President Putin left the world in little doubt of his intentions when he made the official request to his parliament to sanction the deployment, and they swiftly agreed. Ukraine responded by calling for general mobilization. Just yesterday, President Obama warned Moscow there would be costs if Russia intervened militarily. Well, in a moment we'll hear from Dominic Raghorn in Washington on what America's and the UN's next moves might be.
The nascent Ukrainian government sees this all very differently. It's calling it an act of aggression and is accusing Russia of launching a full-scale invasion.
The Russian Federation has built up forces of 6,000 people. That is a grave violation. Around 30 armoured vehicles were deployed on the territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea.
But Moscow is denying this is an invasion. It says its actions are legal, and it's working in tandem with the Crimean authorities, who've invited them to stay.
Well, if it does come to armed conflict, how do Ukraine and Russia's military forces compare? The Russian army has 285,000 soldiers, more than 4 times as many soldiers as Ukraine's, with 64,750. And Russia also has twice as many tanks, 2,550 compared to 1,110 for Ukraine. Russia's Air Force has 1,389 combat-capable aircraft to Ukraine's 221. That's 5 times as many. And when it comes to the Navy, Russia has 116 surface vessels to 11 for Ukraine and 64 submarines. Ukraine has 1. And while the number of personnel in Ukraine's Navy, including naval infantry, comes to 16,950, Russia can count on 150,000, of whom 11,000 are based in Crimea.
They know for a fact that the West are not going to help them militarily. You know, we've heard some quite strong words from John Kerry in your report just before now, you know, talks of, you know, visas and economic sanctions. But really, do we really think that the Russians care about that? You know, when you contrast it to the sort of sense of national pride
so what
and
you're saying then is the talk,
right?
So is what you're saying the talk that you're hearing from the United States, for example, as well as other Western powers, is just that talk, that they won't intervene?
Well, again, what do we mean by intervention? Yes, they won't turn up at some G8 talk in Sochi.
No, I'm talking about military intervention. We're talking about direct military intervention.
It just will not happen. There is not the appetite there. There's not the platform to do it. And NATO or the US or whatever our allies are just not going to spend blood and money sorting out what is essentially a Ukrainian issue. There's a real understanding that while we might not like what the Russians do in their own backyard, it is their backyard, and any pressure we can put, any power we can push on them, it'll be soft power, it'll be economic and social, not militarily.